I was in youth ministry, the senior pastor met with our youth and asked all of them to answer his questions by raising their fingers. The more fingers they raised, the more they agreed with his statements. He asked, "How many of you would say that you love Jesus and are confident about your faith?" Everyone raised his or her hands with 4 or 5 fingers. Next, he asked, "How many of you are comfortable talking about your faith with your friends at school?" People raised their fingers, 3 or 4 fingers. As I watched the youth raise their fingers, I was pretty excited. I thought to myself, I'm doing a pretty good job. These youth seem to be confident about their faith. Not bad. That's when the pastor surprised me. He said, "For everyone to be welcome here, you don't have to be so sure of yourself." What would church look like if some people raised only 1 or 2 fingers? That moment has been etched into my memory. As I think back at the time, I ask myself, what does it mean to be a sanctuary as the church? Can sanctuary as a church be a place where people who are strong and people who are struggling in their faith encounter God? In this session, we will focus on God's dwelling place while the Hebrew people were in the wilderness. Yahweh provided a new rhythm. God gave them the 10 Commandments so that they could experience true love and freedom in the way they lived their lives. And the Hebrew people carried the Ark of the Covenant as a sign of God's presence. God dwelt among them. I can only imagine how many fingers the Hebrew people would raise on their journey from Egypt to the Promised Land. The book of Exodus documents their joys and their mistakes. I wonder, what does it mean to be a living reminder of the presence of God for those who might raise only 1 or 2 fingers? I was once in a meeting with a person in my church community who's a regular attendee of Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous. As he shared his story, he kept having to stop mid-sentence. He kept stopping because he was trying not to curse. Every time he started to colorfully use a 4-letter word, he would instinctively duck his head and look around my office, as if he expected lightning to strike him, or maybe someone from the office to come in and tell him to hush up. After a few minutes of watching him struggle to articulate himself, minus words that were clearly a part of his everyday language, I told him that he could express himself any way that he needed to. After that, I could see him literally exhale deeply, relax his shoulders, and begin to share what was on his mind. Now something, perhaps sitting in my office or the title on my door, gave him clues to believe that he needed to act differently. I'm a fan of a robust vocabulary that is not limited by simply cursing. And yet there are times when people just need to say what's on their minds and in their hearts. I'm not sure if this young man would be able to express his hurt and his heart without using his typical vocabulary. From that moment in time, we created a sacred space for him to feel accepted. Somehow, there was a sacred and mysterious moment where this young man realized that he was in the presence of God. In your study this session, look for ways that the presence of God created a sacred space for the Hebrew people. How does the tabernacle remind them of God's presence in the moments they needed God most? As you dive deeper into the session and continue to study Scripture, I pray that you're both encouraged and challenged. What a gift it is to worship God who is so consistent and faithful from generation to generation. God who is the source of our hope and who is our sanctuary.